Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. Every Monday morning, we do 3 short stories, 1 big story, wins and losses. I'm with my co-host, Ann Zeta. Our first recording, post-election results. What a week.
It has been. I think right when you started the introduction, I sighed again. And I've been doing quite a bit of sighing as we've been preparing to talk today. One thing I did do is I went back and listened to our last podcast because I was like, what did we say prior to the election? And I realized that I was unsure. I was unsure about what the results were going to be. I said yes to a couple of requests for me to go speak to people that were after the election that I thought, I made the commitment to go speak to some groups after the election. And I think in my mind, I thought one result would be happening and then I would have something positive to say. And now I'm having to kind of rethink those
And you haven't had those talks?
No, they're next week. So, but I think in speaking to a friend here earlier today, she reminded me that it's not my job to tell people what to do because I'm literally kind of processing and figuring out what I want to do and need to do. And so it's not my job to have the answers for everybody, which is why we're kind of doing a little bit different take on the podcast here today.
Yeah. And so what we're going to do for you guys today, we're not doing 3 short stories, 1 big story. We're just going to do an analysis over the election. We're going to talk about the results. What do we see from the results? What does the results tell us? Possibility, what trends or hypotheses we can come up with. There's been so many different versions of what people are seeing. What went wrong in the election and the campaigning and just like the Democratic Party as a whole. Like, what do we need to think there? And then what's next? Like, where do we go from here? And so that's how we have this broken down.
We will have lots of things to share with you. So like in the show notes, some of the articles that we've been sending to each other that touch on those topics, kind of analyzing the results. I listen to myself to a lot of other people's podcasts, and some of them not locally focused. Most of them are kind of like nationwide focused. But there was some interesting takes on all of that, and that's kind of been helping me process. So those were some of the things that I sent you to during this last few days. So Absolutely. We'll share all of those.
Absolutely. We also have sent out all of our 817 Gather invitations for our first in-person kind of community connection event. So really excited for those of you who are going to be able to join us for that next week before we record on November 17th for the November 18th show. But let's go ahead and dive into some results. Let's kind of look and assess. So clearly, when I go back to my reflections of that episode that we sent, I was talking about, if Trump wins, I need to self-assess who I am and what I think and how I fit into this world. And to me, that was the biggest shocker for me. The other thing that I thought was a kudo of the podcast, we did talk about counties like in the suburbs, really getting out the vote for registered voting better than the urban counties. And was that a good sign or a bad sign? Clearly, that was a bad sign.
Yeah, because we did get to analyze kind of early voting results last week because those were available. And so that turnout in those counties was what we kind of dove into.
Yeah. And so when you look at this election, right, let's compare it to 2020. 81 million people, plus a million people voted for Joe Biden, 74 million voted for Donald Trump. When you compare the vote outcomes for that election to this election, we went from Democrats having a plus 7 million voters to a Republican plus 2.4 million voters. The total vote cast dropped almost 2.5 million, but the Republicans gained 2.5 millions, while the Dems lost almost 6 million. So really, the election results show us that Dems did not show out to vote. The estimates looking at this article by Chris Tackett is what we're seeing here is that he's even arguing that 40% of the people registered to vote stayed home in Texas. So that's ultimately like one of the biggest shockers. Like that was something not on my bingo card of seeing that Democrats weren't fired up to vote against Trump. Trump is a villain. Trump gets people worried. Everyone's going to come out on the Democratic side to vote against this man.
Well, and yeah, coincidentally, I went to a gathering yesterday where Chris Tackett was the speaker. And so he was saying that he had seen, that whole thing we touched on last time about how there were only 12 days of early voting this time, whereas in 2020 there were 18 days of early voting. And he specifically mentioned the fact that there was all this uproar and hoopla about how great turnout was. And he was saying, I am screaming from the rooftops, it's not that great. Everybody needs to go vote. Everybody needs to go vote. So I really thought there was a huge voter turnout too. And for us, it was more like, who are the people that are actually turning out? But it turns out that the people that we thought were excited and saying that they were motivated to do so were not doing so in as big a numbers as we were led to believe.
Yeah, and I think the thing that is also like a part of this kind of data here is when you look at the hard blue counties that are like the 11 counties, that would include Tarrant County, which Tarrant County did go Donald Trump this election. Tarrant County went red for the first time, I guess since not Beto's election, not Joe Biden's presidential election. We've been seeing that we've been purple for a
Trending
while.
Purple.
And so that definitely broke, and it didn't just definitely broke. I mean, Trump really won. I mean, Colin Allred barely skinned by in Tarrant County to get the majority. But clearly people were voting Trump, but did not like Cruz, which was fascinating. So Trump got 51.86% of the vote. Kamala Harris got 46.6% of the vote. So there was some independent or third-party candidates people voted for. Colin Allred won 48.9% to Ted Cruz 48.7%. You're looking at roughly the difference is 253 voters went Colin Allred. So again, we went massively backwards in Tarrant County where we thought we were more of a purple city becoming more blue. This to me is the part that really hurts the case is more the local results rather than the national results. But that's something we notice as well. Going back to those 11 deep blue counties, there's 9.7 million voters from those county, which is half of the registered voters in the state. So Chris Tackett talks about how we need to focus on getting the votes out in just those 11 counties because over half of the registered voters in the entire state of Texas are in those blue counties.
And he mentioned people who are eligible to vote who didn't show up to vote. And this is kind of a anecdotal side note, but I know two people who are related to me that are still on the rolls in Tarrant County, but haven't voted in a Tarrant County election in multiple years and live in another state now. And so they may show up in that list of eligible voters in Tarrant County, but they're not anymore because one of them is actively voting in another state.
Yeah.
The other one is not actively voting anywhere, to my great chagrin, but they're not voting here. And if there's actual purging of the rolls of people who should not be on there, those two people should not be on there. And I don't know, but I have heard stories of people who got purged that are still active voters here. So I don't know who's making those decisions, but it seems like somebody needs to clean that up.
And investigate how do we do the purging process.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like an opportunity there for like the Texas Tribune, or ProPublica, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Texas as a whole went more red. We went 5.6% to Trump. We went nearly 14% to Trump this election. And honestly, he went red in every county across America. But if you really look at the percentage of the vote for Donald Trump in 2024 than they had in 2020, the vote gap in 2021 was 630,000. But it was 1.5 million in 2024 when you look at the results. So what is interesting is that the net difference is that the vote was only 32,000 less in 2024. So when you look at how many people voted in Texas, it was 32,000 less. But the weird thing is, but we look at all these new registered voters, and we're not even just talking about the purged ones you were talking about, but Texas is also adding all these new voters. So then what happened? And so that's where, like, at the end of the conclusion here, which I think Chris Tackett is right, Democrats didn't go out to vote, and we had a poor turnout for this election. And so he's saying of the 18.6 million registered voters, 7.3 decided to sit the election. And so that is, if you look at the entire setup, more people sat out than vote for Republicans in Texas. 6.3 million people voted for Republicans. 7.3 million registered Texans did not vote. So in a weird way, Texas is not a red city. Texas is not a blue city. Texas is a I don't care city, a state. That's to me like a fascinating part that I don't think we talk about in Texas. Oh, we're a Republican state. No, we're a state that doesn't vote. So then we end up Republican because the person in second is Republican.
Yeah, I think I did see a graphic that showed the didn't vote, like, and it grayed out like parts of the state that had that state of apathy in 2024, Texas. And this maps electoral votes by county if abstaining from voting counted as a vote for, quote, nobody. And it shows basically more grayed out areas than I think red or blue. So winners of nobody versus Trump versus Harris. So we can attach that too. That was a Philip Kearney 2024 graphic. Counties won by nobody do not necessarily represent counties in which a majority of eligible voters abstained, but rather those counties in which no single candidate received more votes than the total number of abstentions. In total, out of 19.2 million eligible voters in Texas in 2024, 33% voted for Donald Trump, 25% voted for Kamala Harris, and 41% abstained from voting. Total number of eligible voters derived from the U.S. Census Bureau voting age population data. So it gives the resources of where they came up with these numbers as well. So you, like you said, it's like a state of apathy. And that goes back to the whole what drives people to vote and what makes people not vote. And that your vote counts, your vote is your voice. I think there's just people who just truly don't believe that. Yeah. And unless they personally witness an election where, because there have been elections where they've had a recount. It was so close. Somebody asked for a recount. And there's been like city council representatives, not in Fort Worth, but in some surrounding cities where the candidate won by one vote.
I mean, think about our school bond the other day for like the couple years back for the middle schools. That barely won in Fort Worth. I know we've dived into a lot of numbers. I'm going to kind of hit some people offside this base that we can kind of also chat about just on other chairs that you guys may be looking at of who won what. Craig Goldman won his seat. John Love III won his seat, District 6, over Jake Ellzey, the Republican candidate. I don't think people is talking enough about that, or I don't know if that there was an expectation. To me, Jake is a famous conservative. Beth Van Dyne won. We also have Jasmine Crockett remain her seat. Mark Vesey continued to hold in his base. Christy Craddock, railroad commissioner, upsetted Catherine Colbert. Not necessarily upsetted, but defeated the Democratic person. And the Democrats, the Republicans won all the court seats as well. So everything else, Bill Wayborn won his seat. Nate Scatsline, who had the Perla lady run against him, which we probably should have had her on the pod. Nate Scatsline, Mercy Culture representative, who's also a state representative. He held 60% to 40%. So she still got 40% of the votes there. Bill Wayborn won his seat over Patrick Moses, 53.7% to 46.28%. When you look at it, I mean, that's basically a part of who voted for Kamala and who voted for Trump. So there wasn't really much change, which is fascinating when you look at all the accountability being held onto Bill Waybourn. So it's fascinating that didn't make really much of a difference.
Yeah, I think there was some controversy the day of election on that Tuesday because the county commissioners had a regularly scheduled county commissioners meeting, and apparently it was canceled for lack of a quorum because the three Republican county commissioners and county judge didn't show up for the meeting, and the two Democrat county commissioners showed up in order to. Roy Brooks, as the senior commissioner in the room, opened the meeting basically to say we can't have the meeting because of a lack of a quorum and close the meeting. But they didn't feel like it was proper Robert's Rules of Order to just cancel the meeting at that late of a time because you're supposed to send out notice and all that. So they showed up to say nobody's here. And my first thought was, I think that Fort Worth City Council, when Election Day falls on a council meeting day, typically cancel that meeting, but they do that in the whole year calendar, not the day of the meeting or the day before the meeting. So at first I thought maybe that was really what had happened, but then I saw, no, that's not what happened. They literally had it as a regularly scheduled meeting, and only two of them showed up.
And actually, surprising enough, Waybourn got more votes than Donald Trump in Tarrant County. So he got 1,300 more votes. So to me, right, it's meaning that the Bill Waybourn brand and behavior, what we're all shouting clearly as the marginalized voice about his accountability to the deaths in his jails, is a dot on the scope of what people care about right now in Tarrant County. Because if anything, he's more liked and more trusted than Donald Trump himself, who did extraordinarily well this time in Tarrant County. The only person who got more votes than Donald Trump in Tarrant County was Bill Waybourn. So, the culture of Tarrant County, I think, is that they think the things that Tim O'Hare and the Matt Krauses and the Waybourns, that is ultimately what they see as safe, certain, and will get them to where they want to go. I know we spent a lot of the front half of this podcast, or the front fourth of this podcast, talking about the results. Let's stop looking at the numbers. Let's stop talking numbers. Let's just talk about feelings now. I want to talk about, how do you feel? You and I were probably the most silent we have ever been over a 7-day period this week since we started the pod together.
Yeah, when I thought,
and it was her birthday, guys.
I know.
And I didn't even say happy birthday.
My birthday was Friday. But yeah, you're right. I started to just send you articles in the same way that I always send articles during the week between pod recordings. And then I just thought, I can't just send him this article about something that's so unconsequential. I got to take a minute. And so then I thought, because I was consuming so much material to try to figure out where I stood and what I wanted to do. Because that's really, even Tuesday night, Jim had a soccer game. He went to play soccer. Didn't follow any of it. I put on like a romantic comedy that had nothing to do with nothing and just watched that. But I put on my phone the New York Times kind of needle, but I wasn't watching it. And then I looked at it, and it looked like everything was kind of in the middle, very early in the evening, no results or whatever. And then I started seeing on social media some people kind of raising alarms a little bit. So I went back and looked at it and watched that needle kind of go further and further to the right, and more of the swing states turning red. And Jim is a numbers guy too. Like, he looks at numbers and polls and figures things out. And I think the reason I was so unsure last week when we were recording the pod, and I wasn't just being like, I think I was unsure because I didn't want to be disappointed, and I think I was unsure because I was truly unsure. But all the polls that we were looking at seemed to show it as being a really close race, and then it clearly wasn't. And so I said to my numbers guy, explain this to me, and then please let's sit down and figure out what we're going to do, because I'm not a person who's just going to do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, feelings wise, it's hard for me to say how I feel, because in some ways, like, I feel like there's going to be a lot of growth from this. Number one, clearly Dems are not satisfied, whatever the National Dems group does, and the state of Texas and Tarrant, like, whatever we're doing is no longer working. We try to really middleify the politician, right? Bringing Kamala more to the middle, bringing Colin Aldred and his campaign. That is clearly either going to splinter into other people seeking other parties, or, you know, you saw Bernie Sanders get a lot of praise and he wrote an announcement talking about we're not speaking to the working class, and clearly missing that group. So I think, like, there's going to be some interesting things. The scary part to me, and where I would argue, no, you are directly impacted still, it's like we are now living in an authoritarian, much more authoritarian regime over the next 4 years. Because what I think is happening here is Donald Trump needed the Republicans in 2016. What he needed in 2024 was Elon Musk. And Elon Musk, he knew the only person he needed it attached to was him. And I think now you have the richest man in the world, who also now has a free pass to anything, pretty much. Who, yeah, I that's the part that scares me. Not in the sense of that. Do I think Elon Musk is a villain and a horrible person who is going to put people in camps and is going to kick out immigrants? I don't think that's Elon's narrative. And if he has the end voice, I think the thing I'm afraid about is the shock to the system. If he does decide to pull, I guess, a couple accountability measures for different factories. If he does decide to make cryptocurrency much more a play against the dollar. If he does decide to allow algorithms and AI to do more. If they do decide that him and Trump Social and X are going to be the voice to everyone else, and we're only going to talk about America on those platforms. And that's where everyone now needs to be, where I now feel like I have to download, you know, X or Truth Social, simply because, like, people listen to Russia media, that's our media now. And so, like, I'm being, like, my biggest fear is living in this no balance between free world, private sector capitalists and public sector government. I don't know where that stops in this new society. And that's what mostly scares me.
Well, and like the checks and balances are gone too, because the three, you know, parts of government that are normally supposed to keep each other in checks and balances are now all under one party. And my whole philosophy has always been, you know, working with everyone and bringing people together to talk about where you stand on certain things, and not necessarily, even if my party were in power and control, I wouldn't have a position or a mindset of trying to just eliminate, and as we've mentioned before, make a community, a city, a state, a country inhospitable to people who disagree with you. I just don't think that's the way that any place that I live, I would want that to be the case. And I think that's the worry, is that that's kind of the direction that we're moving in.
Yeah, and some of the more popular numbers, like, that to me spoke with me as a person, directly to my soul. And I shared this with you off the pod. It was a tweet by Ari Fleischer. I don't know what this guy does or who he is or how he rocks, but the stat was, the group Harris did best with tells you why the Democrats have a big problem. Rich people, those making more than 100K. It went from 5 percentage points to Biden to 8 to Harris. The rich are one of the only groups she improved with. Those who never go to religious services were plus 26% to Harris. College grads were plus 8. Postgraduate degrees were plus 24. The Democratic base is college-educated, wealthy, non-religious people. No wonder they're losing Hispanic and working people. They're a party that is increasingly rich, non-religious, and elitist. All he's missing there, which I would be really interested on that data, 35-year-olds who don't have kids. I bet also went
Did really well
outrageously
there.
with Kamala Harris. So he was directly speaking to me. So like that to me is the part of I'm having to, and many of us have to accept. You no longer can say, oh, anyone who voted for Trump, you're out of the picture. Like, no, we're too far off of our scale where we have to realize we lost a lot of just normal folks who think that's a better way to live their life. And that's on all of us who try to care, be more educated. And if you look at that data, it actually showed by how much attention voters pay to political news. And if you put in this survey, you pay attention to the news a great deal, Harris was up 8 percentage points. If you say you listen to political news a lot, Harris was up plus 5%. Do you listen to it a moderate amount? If it was plus 1 Trump. If you listen to political news a little bit, that was plus 8 Trump. If you don't listen to political news at all, plus 15 Trump.
What is the definition of political news?
Well,
Like
I mean,
mainstream media?
I would
Because-
have to look at what like I'm going to put this in the show notes.
Mhm.
But to me, like what it's sharing to me that is that if you consume a lot more news in general, Kamala Harris did good. So this to me goes back to this is the working class average work person who is choosing to watch ESPN rather than CNN.
Mhm.
They're choosing to listen to a crime podcast rather than NPR. And so people who simply just don't consume news, but go to Trump, and then those who do went to Harris. So it's like there's this massive gap of like, how do you talk to people who aren't interested in, but are still going to make their own independent
I mean,
decision?
does that say something about our entire society and our kind of lack of ability to stay focused? I mean, I'm definitely one of those people that has a hard time focusing. I try to consume news and educate myself, but we're all so used to those short, small sound bites. And if something takes more time or energy or focus to consume, we can't focus on it long enough to kind of absorb that information to be an educated and informed person.
Yeah.
The sound bites that are easier, kind of short little sound bites, you hear that and you go, oh, okay, I agree with that. And then you just go with it. Whereas I tend to be like, that sounds a little odd to me. I'm going to go and Google and find full information before I decide whether I think that is a correct thing that I should accept as the truth.
The battle here, though, is that like this wasn't to me about even people thinking about what was right or wrong. It felt like it was just about the feeling of I can't afford my bills, and I used to be able to afford my bills when Trump was here before. And the really annoying part about all of that is that the inflation that we're all feeling is from a pandemic that happened when Biden wasn't president, and inflation that comes from a post-pandemic markets, plus add on the Ukraine and Russia war. It's like a quarter of wheat around the world goes through Ukraine. So it's like all the global logistics that happen there. Then you add on another war with Israel and Gaza and all the Hamas stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of like inflation, but it's like a lot of it came pre-Biden, and then like we don't control the global order as much as people think we do. And then now I just went by the Quick Trip to get over here. Gas is at $2.39. All right, he's been in office for a couple days. Did Trump do it?
He's not in office quite
Yes.
yet.
Yeah, correct. He's not even in office yet, but he's already changing inflation. Inflation gone. Look at that. Now it's like
Fixed.
Yeah, it's fixed. I told you. Day one. Like, but it's like now you saw the stock market. Everyone's going the nuts. The stock market is crushing. If you pull back this whole year, the stock market's been crushing all year. Biden's administration's investment portfolio performed better than Trump's, his 4 years. So the annoying part about it is he's getting this economy that's going up, We're going to, like, it's just crushing, and it's going to look like, Trump did it. He did the things. It's going to be interesting because Elon Musk is already talking about, oh, yeah, we don't need the Inflation Reduction Act. These electric things actually don't service me or service us people, and it's a waste of money. So that's the part that's like, what's the shock in the system? If they stop funding the Inflation Reduction Act, if they say no to the CHIPS Act, what starts happening there? We stop funding Ukraine? What happens to that? What happens to China feeling more comfortable to maybe go against Taiwan? I'm afraid of just like a shock in the system, as more than I am afraid of like social diversity and wars internally, because he's changing his behavior online, because I think Trump is someone who blows with the wind. Whatever the people want, he'll say.
He likes to be popular.
Yeah, and I think he's clearly seeing the only reason why people didn't vote for him is because he makes a lot of negative news and hate. And now that he won, he has no reason to continue to make negative news, because all that leads is to people to feel afraid and then go vote for the other guys next time around. So I actually think you're going to get, people were always saying, oh, this Trump is going to be unhinged because all the other like hinged people have left. But I feel like actually there could be a possible way where it's unhinged from a global level, an economic level, and there's going to be a lot of people getting rich and a lot of people getting impacted economically. That's going to either way or change this, and maybe that re-wakes the working class to come back to Democrats 4 years from now. But these are all just like where I am right now trying to assess it. But at the end of the day, you can't go anywhere else in the world because everywhere else is getting more conservative. Japan, went more left. So what else are you going to do? Besides, like you said, we got to fix this fight, and this is our fight to fight.
Yeah. I think that a disappointment that I had was just in hearing from some folks that were really doing this along gender lines, that there were people who were publicly stating that they could not vote for a woman for president, that this was a man's job.
Wild.
And that's just insane to me. I mean, and when people say, oh, well, we've never had a female president, so that, that's a problem, we should not do that. But there have been strong female leaders in other countries for decades.
Yeah.
And so I really thought that we had come further in all of that. I mean, in Fort Worth specifically, we've had female mayors, the last 2 mayors, and we have had majority women on our council. And we celebrate that and talk about that, and we talk about, women being in other roles in government and in leadership. And I thought that was a discussion and a fight and a battle that we no longer even had to bring up. But it literally, I heard women saying that, which is even more disturbing to me.
Yeah. And that's what I looking at it today, clearly pitting in a multiracial woman 110 days before the election isn't going to fly with the average person. They didn't know who she was. No matter how much money we put in, it didn't change the fact that Trump has been running all his life to be the most popular person in the world. And I think a lot of people are worked up. Here's another reason why I'm hopeful. I know a lot of Democrats who sat out the non-swing state elections. Kind of like when Texas people are like, oh, my vote doesn't matter, it's going to be red. I know a lot of Democrats who said, oh, I'm not voting because I want my constituents to know I don't support that they're pro-Israel, and not supporting Palestine. So like New York, everyone's freaking out, went so red this year, but a lot of those liberal New Yorkers use this as a statement to say, I know you guys are going to go blue anyways, but let me show you how clear that you're not as progressive as I would like you to be. So and then also, if you look at how Kamala Harris campaign spent their dollars, they spent all their energy and strategy when you only have 110 days on those 7 states, the swing states. So when people are freaking out, wow, the red has gotten more red across the country, I actually don't see that as a bad thing. We just had a quick Democratic candidate who didn't have a lot of time and just focused where they needed to focus. And so because of that, there wasn't an excitement everywhere else. But it's not like she lost a blue state. She didn't lose a blue state. She lost all swing states. Yeah. And so she took that leap. And so I feel like it's not as red as people are seeing it because of their strategy. And then if you look at North Carolina, which is one of the more fascinating ones, they're one of the swing states where everything under the president went blue besides him. So like that was an interesting dynamic of like, why was that? But clearly everything else is still confusing.
And I think another topic that has come up a couple of times in the things that I've been perusing is just like people's, on the Democratic side, the whole idea of like who's next. And it's just like a secession thing. And you've mentioned before we started recording about some real rock star people who are in local and state politics that because we've kind of been considered this red state for so long, maybe people haven't given them enough credit or visibility, but that this whole idea, I've heard a couple people talking about, should there be term limits so that people aren't career politicians there for 30 years? I think that gets us in a place where people who are just not reflective of the people that they're representing being there, making the decisions over and over and over again. And I think that if we can figure out a way to make people want to serve their community in elected office for the right reasons, then we can have a diverse representation that really truly reflects the community. I think that serving in elected office got to a point where, and maybe still is at a point where it just comes across as being just a toxic cesspool that nobody wants to be involved in, or nobody rational, or nobody who's willing to work with everybody. And it's just the extremes. And so my takeaway, and kind of going into our third topic of where do we go from here? I want to do something. I want to continue to work to make my community better. And the way I think that I hope to do that is to continue to support people in the community who are doing community work for the right reasons, working with their neighbors, talking to the community, including people, not isolation, because that's been another big one, not necessarily locally dividing, people by party, but like, are we as America just going to become isolationists and only take care of America and not do anything outside anymore? And I just don't think that's the answer locally. And I don't think that's the answer statewide. And I don't think that's the answer for our country. I think the way that you have a better community is to do community work. And I don't know exactly what community work looks like, but I feel like some of the stuff we're doing with Gather is going to...
Yeah. To me, we'll see what happens with the 817 Gather, because it definitely needs to have more... Progressives and Democrats need more physical spaces to build community, because most of the Texas churches and the Texas capitalist class, they're red. You can go into a Texas company and you can feel that this is all about markets and money. Everyone politically votes that way. You can walk into a Texas church and feel that on the most churches. Where do you walking in and feeling, oh, these are progressives, outside of walking Arts Goggle once a year? It's like, so we need to have spaces where people feel like it's more normalized. But I also believe the other big issue is that community is more online than inline. I actually believe the internet is more real than the real world. That is what I think this showed us. Let me give you an example. Kamala Harris outspent them by hundreds of millions of dollars, knocked on physical doors, hundreds of thousands more physical doors, had more paper, had Beyonce, had Taylor Swift, had Bad Bunny, had J-Lo, and lost to a guy who had the king of podcasts and a man who runs a social media company. Well, we have to look. Here's a data point that shows me this point. From the Wisconsin exit polls, Trump wins by double digits among voters ages 18 to 24, loses by double digits among ages 65 and older. So that means Kamala Harris was doing her thing. The problem is Kamala Harris is stuck in the physical world, like all of our education schools are, as much as our cities operate. Everything is operated for the 65-year-old. And so she did. Her campaign worked in swing states. The problem is it wasn't a strategy for the young people. And what Donald Trump did is he got on all those little kids' podcasts. They listened to all those things, and they just won the younger vote and a lot of people who learned that way. And I think that's what this woke me up is your in-person event is no longer more important than the podcast we're doing right now. The digital world is where people make a reality and decision of how they operate in the physical world. And so the idea of community is shifting in that way, because why create a library in city of Fort Worth when more people are downloading Libby? Why would I spend tens of millions of dollars to build a new downtown library, but more people are downloading Libby?
EJ, you're going to have people coming at you.
I'm just giving you an example, though.
No, I get it.
I'm giving you an example of the digital world having influence.
I think that is an absolute valid point. And I, as a now 58-year-old mother, just having had a birthday, and whose children do a ton of stuff online. We have literally, as a family, had conversations, and I have had to be, and I'm not sure I'm totally quite there yet, but this might push me right over the edge. I've had to be convinced that online relationships are like real relationships. And the funny thing is, I've been connected to a group of moms since 2000 that were all pregnant, due with a child in 2001. We started communicating on an online platform. And these women are from all over the country and Canada. And so I literally have had a relationship, quote unquote, that is all online, except for because I live in DFW and a lot of people fly through DFW, I've gotten to meet a bunch of these women in real life. Yeah. And because I travel different places, I've been able to meet a bunch of these women in real life. Yeah. So that is what has helped me kind of understand and believe my children when they tell me that they maintain and grow relationships online with people they've never met before face to face.
Yeah, you're having more and more the new member of a wedding is a person who's at the wedding. Oh, this is the first time they met the groom.
Person.
Yeah, because we play video games together.
Yes.
That's a common member of a wedding party now.
Yes.
Oh, this is the first time we met, but we played Call of Duty since we were 16 together.
Yes. I have a friend whose daughter actually just went to meet a person in real life for a birthday party. And my friend who's my age was like, text me every minute to make sure that this is a real person and that you're safe and all of that kind of thing. And that literally would be where I would be coming from. And watching Catfish has definitely made me worry about that kind of stuff.
And so to me, it's like we're living in a day where when people say they have a best friend, their best friend lives further away from them today than any other time in history. Because this digitization of life, and you know me, this started back when it went from Kmart, Sears, and Blockbuster to Amazon, Temu, and Netflix. The world is becoming this way. Now, if you look at the pandemic, accelerated teaching us to have contactless, humanless interactions with each other, right? Like the Uber drivers they have AirPods in. The guy who's dropping the Amazon packet to me, he has an AirPod in. We're not talking to each other. We're not connecting to each other. So the physical world, in my opinion, is actually becoming more lifeless than the digital. And that's what I think Trump and Elon clearly saw of people are more alive online and passionate.
And we can harness that.
Then we can harness that we have lost in the physical world. And this is that break where now I'm afraid of the shock of, okay, because you're right, because the libraries and the government institutions and colleges, they all matter. These physical schools, these historic schools, this is going to be the conversation when they look, now that you have a whole red slate, how do we get efficient? How do we optimize the government? How do we do that? And this is going to be the answer. Digitization. And that is going to create a lot of collapses and challenges. There's going to be some people who see an entrepreneurial opportunity, but there's going to be a lot of people who get stuck in that physical world that didn't see like this presidency is going to make that happen. That's to me what I think this is.
Local government has been stuck, and they've been part of the problem too, because I remember every time we talked about communicating in a different way, in a more modern way, in a more digital way, we always got pushback from people who are like, what about the old people? I'm like, my mother is 85 and she emails, and she doesn't like social media, but she emails, she texts, she's got a phone. so we have old people now that don't need a physical newspaper anymore. So, but for years, literally, it was like, well, we can't give up this way of communicating because this group of people communicates this way. But now what we're finding is we have to add this way of communicating because this group over here has been left behind. So it's not that the seniors are left behind, it's that the young people are not being engaged in these efforts.
Well, it's almost the young people are saying we're not left behind. Y'all just don't operate in the real world anymore.
Yeah.
That's like we are. Yeah, like, they left us behind, and that's to me the biggest part of. And how we reacted. I know now I'm shooting for my book. Now we're talking about forcing people to go to work in the office. We're phone bannings. We're not preparing ourselves. Instead, we're getting afraid of it, and we're doubling down and clenching in our claws and biting our teeth even harder into what we believe, rather than seeing that this is why a big part of why we lost. But I tell you, you were talking about your mom. This survey on The Economist, which I'll put it in the show notes, so over 35% of boomers said a social media influencer influenced them to purchase something.
Believe me, I went to Rotary the other day and somebody was wearing this like Halloween skirt that has been popping up in my Facebook over and over and over again, and it has bats on it and it's purple, and I almost bought it, and then I saw it on 2 other people and we all were like, oh yeah, it was popping up in our Facebook.
Well, that's where I tried because they know us so well, and I'm like, oh, I like that shirt. But I now know like I'm never going to buy something from Instagram because then it showed that I got algorithmed. And like if I wear it at a coffee shop, people are like, "Oh, I saw that algorithm shirt. It looked like you fell for it."
Well, literally, I saw that skirt at Rotary, and then one of my neighbors was wearing it when she brought her kids trick or treating, and we all said, "Yep, we saw it on Facebook."
Yep. So when we say the algorithms are nuts, man, and how they know us. And but anyways, I think that was this is the first time where I feel like I could communicate that feeling clearly of like that's the thing I'm most afraid of, but I'm also like, this is where I've already said some things that are offensive today, but like, I also believe that because the economy is going in the right direction and because things are moving in the right direction, he's going to get a layup to look really good and could be what FDR did with the Industrial Revolution, Elon and Trump do in the informational revolution, and it actually does work. I'm not saying it's going to, like, we might be going through the bad part of it, but over time, does this investment into refunding, rechanging how we look at institutions, allow them to get away with trying to make a world that we just talked about? So those are things that I find fascinating. Other things we need to hit before we kind of go to wins and losses is, I think the big thing that we didn't talk about is the Latino men vote. That was a big popular conversation this week. I was in Philadelphia. I was like, man, look at these Puerto Ricans out here being active. You know, you can't call my island a garbage. It was great. And then to see that, nope, these men still voted for Trump, you know. And so he won the Puerto Rican vote in Pennsylvania. It's fascinating. Like, absolutely fascinating. So the Latino men, 59% went to Biden in 2020. 44% went to Harris. So that's a 15-point swing.
It's that woman thing. I think it has to be that woman thing.
I think the women, abortion. We also have to have a real honest conversation around, like, the world we live in doesn't want a federal abortion to recodify vote and bring it back. Roe v. Wade. They don't. Unless you get more people out to vote. I think if you get the people who are not interested in, right, the 40% of people who stayed home, but that doesn't excite them enough to vote. I think that's the challenge there, is like the things we were showcasing kind of reminds me when Beto picked AK-47s in his presidential election. He, like, to get out of the pack, he said, I'm going to pit because of what happened in El Paso, I'm going to pick banning AR-15s or whatever. And he just went hard. I remember the national presidential debate, and he was going. But that really rocked him when he tried to run for governor. And so I think you saw Kamala Harris saying, we're bringing back a federal ban against governments and women's bodies. And but for some reason, I'm not saying that's right,
But for some reason, that was a big
Like,
for
it
all
didn't
these like,
resonate with
the
everybody.
Hispanic population, the conservative, abortion.
I think that, again, it's does that apply to me? And is it directly going to impact my life, and not looking at how it might directly impact somebody you love? And then those stories about people where it did directly impact their lives in a really negative way. I mean, for me, it's more about people who are not doctors making laws that affect the relationship between an individual and a medical opinion about what should happen. That's terrifying to me. And it doesn't just apply to the abortion issue. It applies to healthcare. It applies to insurance. I personally have had insurance companies say things about what they will and won't cover to do with my body and my relationship with my doctor and what my doctor thinks is best for me. Nothing to do with reproductive care, that I just think is not their job. Yeah. That's not what they should be doing. But there's a lot of people out there who haven't had that personal experience or seen someone have that personal experience. And it just seems to me that in some of these issues, unless they've seen it happen to somebody that they know that's sitting right in front of their face, they're like, well, that doesn't really impact me, so I'm good with it. This over here is more important.
Yeah, and that goes, again, the big one, the clearest one that's the truest and true of all lines, the educated class is all in on the Democratic agenda and the terms that we agree to. I think like what you and I see are also the information of you had a personal experience, but then you also, like you said earlier, you don't just think about the people closest to you. Even if you didn't, your perspective and how you live in the world. And I think that's the problem. And I think the problem is you and I get on these podcasts and this podcast isn't made for working people. This podcast is made for elite people like you and I who like to nerd out on the news and talk very sophisticated and snooty about the data. And how could anyone ever do this? Because I can't comprehend it. But that's like,
I have time to comprehend.
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. And we have this podcast that is made for, and so it's like, is it art? Even like, how do we get to the table? Whoever is bringing the working class community together to just be an ally and a member to it. I don't even think it's our responsibility to find it or get them to understand. But I think there's so many versions of this happening in America and in Tarrant when it comes to the Democratic divide with the working class and even within ourselves.
Yeah, I think the one thing that kept coming up for me was, I believe in a social safety net. I believe in a government that provides some things beyond the basics of just the pipes in the ground and the trash being picked up and the water coming out of your faucet. I believe in a little bit more coming from the tax dollars that I pay and the government and the elected officials that serve. And we have not had a fully functioning safety net in a really long time. And so many of these folks that you just named that are 18 to whatever, that are young, they haven't seen what that safety net delivers. So they can only try to imagine what it is that a Democratic candidate is saying will happen if you give us a chance. And it's not a solid thing. And the other side can say, yeah, and you'll have to pay more taxes for that. So the easy soundbite versus the complicated explanation of something that a person has not experienced in their lifetime, I think leads people to not understand what a robust social safety net would provide.
Yeah. Let me just say this data. So I gave our Latino men a hard time. Like, yo, what are we thinking? Like, but we were 6% of the people who voted. White women were 37% of the vote. So let me give you this. Let me go back. Latino men were 6% of the vote in 2024. Latino men were 5% of the vote in 2020. So a part of my sadness there is there are a lot more Hispanics today than 1% left over 4 years. Yeah. In 2020, white women were 32% of the vote. 37% of the vote. So there was a 5% lift in the amount of white women who voted this time around. than the last time, which then went 47% to Harris, a 3-point lift to Biden, 44%. But it's still majority, like it's still a segment of people who vote majority Trump. But maybe that abortion stuff is the reason why so many women came out to vote, right? So we had the largest group of people based off of gender and race is white women, 37% to white men, who was 34%. And I believe I saw that this is the first race in history where white men were not the main category in an election. So let's be clear. We just voted for all white men, and the white woman is the majority voter in America in 2024.
I saw plenty of white women not voting the same as I vote.
Yeah. It's just a fascinating, it's just fascinating because you're talking about abortion and like the freedom of body and listening to the doctor, and then like this immigration stuff, but these Hispanic people are voting for Trump. Like, it's just like, it's like, and then we talk about like these people with traditional values and families, like Trump and Elon got like 4 kids, 6 wives. Like, they do not have an American household. Like, when you look at the American household that you say is a conservative family, Trump's family and Elon's family, when you go and have dinner at their houses, don't look like the one you admire to have. But like, we want that. Like, it's just like,
we should have all kinds of families. I'm fine with all kinds of families.
I agree, but it's just like I'm trying to, like, where is, and it just comes down to, and I can understand that it's hard to live today, and that's what it just comes down to. I can't pay my bills. I used to be able to afford my bills. I used to be able to afford my bills in 2017. Trump was president. I genuinely believe that's what, people are filling their bank accounts. You remember that article with Dallas apartments or renters spending a third or a half of their money on rent, and it was a large number.
Oh,
like,
and my kids talk about being able to afford a house, all the things.
Yeah.
I mean, I look back, I won't, I mean, I've already told people what the housing market was like when I was buying a house.
Yeah. But that's also the kicker is this, and I know I'm not an economist. I mean, I read The Economist every week. Like, that's a habit that I've stayed for a long time, for like 6 years. But to me, it's like, I know this doesn't make the full sense, but when people talk about inflation, but then you talk about record profits. So in the same year, the company that said they had to raise their prices also
had record profits.
Record profits. There's so much lack of accountability and blind eye to capitalism in America. Like, we just think it's right, which I think, unlike some people, I do believe capitalism as an economic driver to get people out of poverty and create the worlds that we all get to live in today, where no matter how hard my life is, I can still press a button and get an oat macchiato soy in 5 minutes from my phone. Okay? Like, my life is still crazy compared to my grandpa who only could pick Folgers. Okay? But those things are just not talking to each other. It's like the wealth of the capitalistic class, but we're not talking and keeping them accountable, or the Christian religion group accountable. We have more non-religious people than religious people under 50, when you look at under 50. But it's like, there's just this tide where, but that group went to Kamala Harris, which gets me excited more and more for the 817 Gather. If more and more people are becoming like the people who voted for Kamala Harris from a religious perspective, we're going to need to start creating spaces like the 817 Gather that feels like spaces Republicans have in their churches. And I think that gets me really excited as someone who doesn't go to church, doesn't believe in God, but has other people who are, oh, you're like me. I'm not just a lone person, right? Like, we live in a society where I think a politician, what's our guy that we really love from Indiana? Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Today in America, he has a better chance of running for president as a gay man than an atheist man. You have better running chance of becoming a black man than an atheist man in America. So we talk about inequities in the world. We cannot comprehend different religious views. Like, it is mind blowing. Like, these are all the things that we have to take from them. This obsession that capitalism and its whole heart is good. An obsession that Christianity is the only way. Because the mass of people aren't those things anymore. Most people don't want to become ultra rich and it's all about money and big homes. You see these Gen Zers moving more and more to the urban areas, like that article said.
Yeah.
Because they want to
And
be
my
access.
kid wants balance in their life. They want a balanced life where they get to do things with their friends. It's not all about the almighty dollar, even though they were raised by parents whose dad started out with, like, my goal each year is to make more money than I made the year before. My goal someday is to make more money than my dad made. Yeah. And my kids are not having those goals. Yeah. That's not their goals at all. Yeah. And they care about other people being able to eat and live and have shelter.
And so that's where, kind of closing this part out, what are some of our suggestions on what we would recommend people who are in power on the Democratic side do? Like, what are some ideas? Like, because I think this year was the agenda of let's try to get these Republicans to vote for Harris, and she got a 1% lift. 5% Republicans vote for Joe, 6% for Harris. So all that money and messaging didn't work. You have a bunch of Democrats who stayed home. But I as much as I hear the Bernie Sanders, like, we got to re-talk to them. And I think, like, he kind of mentioned that, like, when you talk to working class people, they will vote for the things that will make their lives better. And he was talking about inflation. And we were talking about niche things that I guess it doesn't apply to me. And I mean, as much as we want to judge them, that you should think of other people. But, like, this guy was talking about inflation. So that's going to be a fascinating journey over the next 4 years, is where does the Democratic Party move?
There is one podcast that I'm going to have you put in the show notes. That's the run-up, where a voter that they had been following through the entire election process did come down on the side where she voted for Trump. And she basically was saying that it was because she's in manufacturing and she thought that he would bring back manufacturing. And, I, as an environmentalist my whole life, I want us to try to find other ways of having energy and, getting around in the world than things that are just kind of ruining the planet. But I don't want to destroy people's lives who have had those jobs. And so it's not a matter of shaming someone who currently has a job in manufacturing that might be, taking resources and depleting the earth. It's finding other ways for people to make a living and shifting those things, not just mandating them, but not taking away people's ability to make a living.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, and you just talking about that is like, that's another big one, is climate, environment. What does it do now with a trifecta for the conservative class?
And getting rid of all regulation.
But now, and the sad, scary thing is, the only person who believes in climate change is real is Elon Musk, and he is also trying to just make electric cars. So it's just like, what's his conversation to Trump, who's probably now the only voice he's listened to that can say, Trump, you need to take climate change seriously and do X, Y, Z. And he's like, okay, Elon, I'll do that. But, like, it's going to be an interesting 4 years. I hope and pray that
we got some elections in 2 years that might change the House and Senate, but yeah.
But we got to find a voice real quick. Mm-hmm. We got to find a voice real quick. I told you, the only answer we have right now is the lady who doesn't want to run for office, but she's our only answer.
Don't let anybody think that you're talking about me, because you're not talking about me.
No, you're a great lady as well, but I was talking about the Michelle Obama.
Yeah, I'm not comparing myself to Michelle Obama, but I thought that cryptic way of saying what you just said might lead some people astray.
Michelle Obama is probably looking in the mirror right now and be like, y'all really are making me the only one that maybe can bring us hope out of this fascist state. And the Obamas are going to give us the first male president, black male president, and the first female president. That's our only Hail Mary. Right now, I'm not saying, like you said, we have a lot of young cats. They can come up. They can figure out their voice. But to me, I'm too scared to put up a person of color. I'm too scared to even put up Pete Buttigieg right now. I was like, we need Pete. Pete's got this. I'm like, there's no way they voting for Pete. And it's just like, but I don't know. Maybe we just got to look at the people who didn't vote. What would get them out to vote? We don't need to clearly change the 71 million people who are going to continue to vote for Trump, no matter what happens. But all the people who sat on the sidelines, what did we not say, or what did we not portray to get them to vote?
And I think we're definitely still processing. We don't have answers here, even though we did say that our third point was, where do we go from here? And my thoughts are just that where do we go from here is not just burying our head in the sand, blocking out everybody in our lives that doesn't agree with us. I definitely don't want to discourage people from doing what they need to do in order to bring themselves peace, because I understand. I have an understanding of the privilege where I sit and my ability to continue to consume media that is very disheartening and discouraging and not be threatened by that. But I think everybody needs to do what they need to do to take care of themselves. But I hope that people don't come away from this podcast with such discouragement that they don't feel like they can continue to do good community work here in Fort Worth, Texas.
Yeah. I think my last kind of take on where we need to go from here is the disruptors one, right? Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Trump. We admire disruptors. We don't admire normal day life, which comes from institutions and systems. And the government, in America's eyes, we have, of all the G7 or OECD countries, we have the least respect for government. When you just poll us on, do you trust the government? Americans say no. So it's the relationship of understanding like we are taking advantage of living on the best democracy stack in the world that is also having an economic GDP of 3% this year. Another Bidenomics. It's like we have to quit being obsessed with the capitalists and that we think independence means no systems or institutions. That's the part I'm afraid of. Like how do you give a PR campaign for the government? That
I think some of these people don't want any government.
Exactly. Like they're just like, nope. Anyways, let's go ahead. We got like a couple minutes to go into wins and losses. We start with our loss because we like to end on a high note. My loss, and you have way more information on this than I do, is the TMP station bar has closed down. And the reason why is just it's been closed for a little bit. But why I believe in that bar is just it was a great historic thing that I enjoyed too. Me and my wife got married at the TMP station. You know, that bar was, the tavern was really great. And so I know they're looking for restaurants now to be in there. So maybe it can be something else. But I'm really, I guess, kind of turning this into a win because I am hopeful, though, that whatever comes into the TMP station is going to complement all the exciting things we just have happening right there around TMP station.
Yeah, I think that definitely it's a loss because the tavern was a great location. I loved going there too. The station itself is a beautiful space. Trinity Metro now owns all of it, and not the whole building, but the lobby and the tavern itself. There is also long-range plans for transit-oriented development on the Vickery side of the TMP, which would make that just a much better thing and add to the whole South Main Village. So I think in the long run, it's going to be a good thing to have all of that kind of under the ownership of Trinity Metro. And hopefully with all the momentum that we've been having here locally for multimodal transit, that can be something. I would like there to be a restaurant there. Obviously, I would have loved to have seen the TMP station lobby back in like a transit operations kind of thing, and not be a space that's kind of normally just locked off unless somebody's having a private event there. I would love for people to be able to come down the new promenade from Lancaster into the beautiful doors of that lobby on a daily instead of having to go around, which they've added signage that now makes that easier. But
that would look so cool.
The Sacramento train station is gorgeous like that.
Yeah.
I mean, not ours is way more pretty than Sacramento, but it's,
just walk through it.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome.
It's beautiful. So I
awesome.
think it would be nice if somebody takes it over as a restaurant and uses it as an event space, but allows people to walk through it when it's not being used as an event space, then that would be a cool collaboration. So I think your loss of the TMP Tavern, which the owners of that were fabulous. I loved them and loved that whole place as well. So
Yeah.
that definitely is a
Good,
loss.
yeah.
I'm not taking away from that, but I think that in the long run.
What is your loss?
So my loss is that North Texas ozone levels are getting worse and air planners don't expect them to improve. That came from an article at the end of October, so it's been a little bit, but I just think that, kind of hearkening back to some of the comments that I was making about environmental regulation and concerns about maybe not continuing down the route of having environmental regulations concerns me. And I'm worried about the air quality in North Texas. I have friends that suffer from allergies, and when I see my weather app telling me that the air is unhealthy for people who have, respiratory issues, that doesn't make me excited about living in a place that's all hazy and
Hey,
yuck.
you're gonna have RFK Jr. ahead of health. You're gonna have Tiger King ahead of Wildlife Services. Hopefully they're reading this article and taking it serious for us, So,
I don't even know what to say to that.
so my win. This is I feel like I've talked about Leon Bridges like the last month, but Leon Bridges has ended his tour this Friday at the Dickies Arena. He's going to have Charlie Crockett there and the Hermanos Gutierrez there. But I just think his last album is about Fort Worth, and he's ending it in Fort Worth, sold out arena. Really excited to see that magic, see history made. To me, I would compare this second to George Strait opening up Dickies Arena. This is to me like on that level of history. And then, but this whole weekend's going to be fun. We got Shaq coming in town to do his EDM concert again. So Shaq is doing the EDM show that I always think brings people from far away to the city. So I think that's interesting.
Also brings all the people that complain about noise.
Yep. Yeah. And then Sunday is the 817 Gather. So we have a full weekend next weekend, and I'm excited for it.
There you go. So my win is we did have an article talking about streetcars maybe back on the table for discussion in Fort Worth, and I've been part of those conversations. But that, along with the fact that Community Design Fort Worth is going to be having our first transit mixer on November 20th from 4:30 to 6:30 at Acre Distilling near Central Station downtown. We've done a ton of things at the TNP Tavern that were transit related, and that was definitely something that I was going to miss, but we can't really go to a space that doesn't have a food drink operator.
Yeah.
So thankfully, Acre Distilling has agreed to allow us to have our kind of come and go casual mixer of people who believe in transit and transportation, multimodal transportation, to gather monthly. So we hope to be doing
That's
this
cool.
every third Wednesday of the month at
That's cool.
Acre Distilling.
I think the 20th I'm in town.
Cool. You should come.
Yeah, I've been reading that City Limit book still. That book is every Texan needs to read that book.
Yep.
I mean,
Megan
every
Kemble.
American I think needs to read the book, but it's gotten so good, and it's
She does it. Megan Kemble wrote a book called City Limits, and it's focusing on highway construction, and it goes all the way back to the start of, interstate highway system and what was it meant to be and where was it meant to go. And she tells anecdotal stories about what highway construction has done to individuals and to communities, and it touches on redlining and, taking people's homes and just all of the things. Induced demand with not fixing congestion by adding
kind
more
of like
lanes.
it's kind of like the color of law for transportation.
Yep.
Like if you were that book about housing that's
Yep.
super famous. It's kind of like that. So if you like that book, you're definitely like this one. This is why I'm telling you we're running an elitist podcast. This is what we're talking about right now. Anyways, beautiful people, you did your win. Go show up to the 20th so we can hang out and talk about transit. And we'll continue to talk about politics and everything Fort Worth on this podcast. You guys have been great. We'll see you next week.